Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our January breakfast for ULI Austin. Glad to have you here today. I also want to thank our underwriter and host today, Capstone Title. I know Brad is in the membership committee and management committee is going to speak for you for a few minutes. We're so thankful for the work that Brad and his committee have done over the year. Our membership has stayed close to 1,000 members, so we really haven't had any fallout from the COVID so far, and I think that's a tribute to his work and also to the great programming. Brad, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Vika. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our ULI January breakfast. So proud to be a part of this and look forward to hearing from our panel. Thank you to the panel for being here. So a little bit about Capstone Title. We're locally owned, Austin born and bred. In fact, this year we celebrated our 7-year anniversary. And over the past 7 years, we've grown quite a bit. We have made the ABJ Fast 50 list of the 50 fastest growing companies in the region over the last 3 years, as well as the Inc. 5000 list for the one of the 5,000 fastest growing privately held companies in America. So pretty proud of those achievements. But I'm most proud of consistently being named one of Austin's best places to work. When we started Capstone, it was a vision of serving others. And I think that we've got a great team of people that believe in that vision. And we love serving the Austin community, the Austin real estate community. And we look forward to being a part of this community for many years to come. So ULI, we've been involved for several years now as a company. And personally, as Vika mentioned, I'm currently leading the membership committee, been involved in the membership committee for several years now, in addition to serving on other panels, local member council. And one thing about ULI that we love is their commitment to Austin and our community and bringing great content. COVID presented a lot of challenges this last year and currently, and ULI did a great job of pivoting to the virtual world and continuing to bring value to its members. Proud of the work that Paulette, Nicole, and Cheryl have done, in addition to all the volunteer members that give countless hours to make sure that we bring great value to membership. So thank you again to ULI for allowing us to be a part of this today, and really look forward to hearing what the panel has to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you again to Capstone Title for their support. Now, Nina Farrell with CBRE will be our moderator today. I'm going to ask Nina to introduce herself more in depth, but I do want to comment on how her interesting public sector background with UT prior to joining CBRE provides great insight to public-private partnerships. I've heard Nina speak on P3 on the commercial local member council and appreciate having her expertise added to this discussion. I will now turn it over to our moderator, Nina.
Thank you, Paulette. So good morning, everybody. Thanks everyone for being here, and thank you to ULI and to Capstone for this panel. My name is Nina Farrell, and I'm a real estate advisor with CBRE. But prior to coming to CBRE, I was with the University of Texas System in their real estate office, working on transactions and strategy for 14 UTs across the state. So I do hope that I have had the benefit of some of the public sector perspective to add to this conversation and to some of the questions. I work primarily still with public sector clients as the assistant regional manager for our public sector practice in the Southwest. So when I was invited to moderate this panel regarding the Economic Development Corporation that's just getting off the ground, I jumped at the chance because I wanted to learn more from the folks who are putting it together from the ground up. And we've also have a couple people on the panel with some fantastic experience from other municipalities to kind of share the real world experience. So with that, let me pass it over to our panelists. I'd like to introduce them and then we'll kick off the conversation. So Veronica, if you'll introduce yourself.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Veronica Briceño. In my normal life, I'm the Economic Development Director for the City of Austin. I'm currently serving as the Chief Economic Recovery Officer for the City of Austin during this pandemic. And I'm here today as your Interim President CEO for the EDC. I'm excited to talk to you more about that today. I've been with the City of Austin for 22 years now, and I'm excited about this new endeavor. Thank you.
Thanks, Veronica. I will not even try to keep all of your titles straight because you have so many. Matthew, if you'll introduce yourself.
Good morning, everybody. Great to be back here with ULI Austin. I am a consultant to the City of Austin. I've been a consultant on different engagements back since 2010. So we're going into the 11th year, although don't worry, it hasn't been every year, just a lot of great engagements. I run a firm called Quadruple Bottom Line Partners, which does inclusive growth and public-private partnership consulting around the country. And I'm also the director of the Urban Lab at NYU. And I'm a very involved ULI member, including with one of my colleagues here on the panel, Tyrone. We're part of the National Council on Public-Private Partnerships.
Thanks, Matthew. Perfect transition. Tyrone, if you would introduce yourself.
Thanks, Nina, and good morning, ULI Austin. My name is Tyrone Rochelle. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I am a private sector advisor now, but I think the reason that I'm being asked is at one point in a past life, I ran redevelopment for the city of Atlanta through its development authority, Invest Atlanta. That organization was responsible for not only business attraction, retention, and recruitment, but also community development. So many financial tools that were put in place to allow projects to happen, particularly in distressed communities that don't attract traditional capital. Very involved with ULI with Matt. I chaired our Public-Private Partnership Council nationally. I'm also an advisory member with the Curtis Infrastructure Initiative and very active in my own ULI Atlanta District Council. So thank you for inviting me here, and I look forward to participating.
All right, thanks everyone. Well, let's get this kicked off. So Matthew, you and Dave Knoll did a fantastic job in setting the stage in the Facebook Live event about the same topic. And that was a 101, kind of a primer. And for anyone looking to revisit that, I believe that it's available, there you go, on the ULI page locally. So check that out. That's a fantastic 101. You know, we aren't going to go over all of the basics of what an EDC are, but I did want to level set for the group today. So our hope is to cover basically three main sections. We want to talk about governance, operations, and mission. And then we want to talk about social initiatives and then interaction with the private sector. So Veronica, if you could kick us off by describing the structure of the EDC, specifically, what's the governance structure? What is EDC's mission? And then if you could parse out the difference between EDD, the city's economic development department, and the EDC, and how your organization will be working with the Austin Chamber as well on what are all similar initiatives.
Absolutely. So the EDC will be, and is, as we're getting its sea legs up, an independent organization. And it's really seen as a partner with the City of Austin and other entities in our community. And I think you can see that with the governance that we set up. The governance is a 22-member board that represents various organizations. I heard in your introductions, I believe it was Paulette referred to the fact that ULI will have one of those representatives on the board. But the idea behind that is that it really speaks to our community values and our community goals. And you'll see that in the reflection of the diverse organizations that are appointing members to the board. The board, right now, we have an interim board to really get the organization created. Everything from a bank account to filing articles of incorporations and so forth. And the interim board is about 5 members, and those are standing members that have distinct identifications. For example, directors of certain city departments, a member of the Music Commission and of the Arts Commission, and so forth. We are planning on bringing forward the remaining nominees to the board to City Council for appointment in February. And once we have those appointments made, we will be moving forward with the full board. You can see these nominating places right here on the screen, and it's quite a robust board. As everyone can see, it's a pretty diverse representation, as I said, of our community values and what we want to see as priorities for this EDC. The EDC really will be set up to be another arm, if you will, of the city, of our community, to really work in the space of primarily where we're seeing in the envisioning it in public development. So we're looking at ways that we can be a nimble entity to help create these spaces of what we want to see in the city of Austin. As I mentioned on my introduction, I'm serving as the interim CEO. I do not intend to be the CEO forever. We will be quickly, as we bring on board the full board, we will be looking to hire a permanent CEO and permanent staff. But right now there is this space where the city is helping the EDC get stood up so that it can be a self-sustaining organization. And in the future, we see this as an extension of our economic development department, one in which economic development will continue in working in this space, but in tandem with this organization. Matt, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Well, I think you did a fantastic job. I don't think I could add anything. Thank you for asking.
Well, and I think it's important just to call out something you said, Veronica. This is the very early stages of the EDC. So the organization is really being structured right now. And I think, this is just a good opportunity to call out the good work that you guys are doing in coming to panels like this and the Facebook Live event that you all did earlier to try to inform the community about what's going on. I know, Matthew, if you could maybe speak to some of the different boards that are being envisioned right now, and specifically, if you'll hit on one of the questions that we have submitted multiple times is, how do I get involved? How can my voice be heard? That came from individuals as well as those that represent various groups within the city. So if you could just kind of speak to how the various voices of the community are intended to be heard in a specific way.
Absolutely. So as you saw from the overall board chart, it was quite a large group. We have about 22 different representatives, and the overall board is supposed to represent the diverse interests of the community, as Veronica said. But in addition, as we get involved with each initiative, it's important to bring on stakeholders that are more skilled in those particular initiatives. So right now, there are a couple different things that we went over as initial projects in the EDC 101. One of those was working on the South Central Waterfront. In that case, the board that is advising is the South Central Waterfront Advisory Board, which was a board created by the City Council. A second group that we are contemplating creating is a Cultural Trust Advisory Committee that has not been created yet. But if you're interested in that, you're welcome to email us. In addition, we have a real estate committee that is composed of managers of real estate of other governing entities. So we have Cap Metro, AISD, ACC, and we're hoping to bring on the county and the state as well onto that group. And then finally, we have a stakeholders group. The stakeholders group is really open to anyone who is interested in staying in touch and learning more. And that's the group that we really put out the calls for participation in these other committees. So what I would advise is if you are interested in being in the know, we suggest you come to the stakeholders group. You can email myself or one of the folks at EDD in the city. The next meeting of the stakeholders group is February 10th. We do those monthly. We also do meetings monthly with council members, stakeholders, and those committees that I mentioned. So we're really anxious to make sure everyone knows what's going on. And that's one of the reasons that we reached out to ULI to get involved in this. If you think there's another group that would benefit from us speaking to them, we would love to know about that. And we're happy to schedule sessions like the one you're in right now.
Fantastic. Thanks, Matthew. So Tyrone, I'd like to turn to you for a moment because you've done this before. You have started an EDC from the ground up. And when we talked in preparation for this call, you described a vast network of intergovernmental agreements that had to be in place really to get things off the ground. Will you talk about those, why they were structured and why they were so important?
Sure. There are a few ways to skin this cat, right? So once in my life, I chaired our county's development authority board. So I've seen it from a governance standpoint. And with Invest Atlanta, I was actually a staff member that had to manage all of these boards and all of these people. So the one way to think about it is that there has to be services that are being offered that are a competitive advantage from offering those same services within the city, either through freedom, the ability to transact business with private sector entities. There's always a reason, right? So what we did at Invest Atlanta is we listed out all those services where there was a competitive advantage to working with our development authority. Those services were codified in an agreement with our city, approved by city council, where in exchange for those services, we received an appropriation from the general fund from the city. So that's one way to do it, right? And obviously in times, public sector resources go up and down. So I would hate to have a one-year agreement to manage that every year during a budget process. That's the worst time to negotiate the value of your services. So what we tended to do was create multi-year intergovernmental agreements. So in the example of Invest Atlanta, we had a 10-year agreement with annual goals where we would present in front of city council during the budget appropriation process to make sure that we were meeting the goals that we set out. So that way you get the longevity of knowing that you have a services contract that is multi-year in term, and the payment for those services would be trued up every year. In addition, by the services that you're doing, you're going to be earning fees, right? So in the instance of Invest Atlanta, we did transactions. We had people who knew finance, who did bond deals. We had a new markets tax credit platform. I managed all of our tax increment finance districts. And with that interaction, we collected fees. So there's a balance of how you're going to sustain yourself, partly through fee income, which probably will come on the back end, right? Because you're just getting started. But those intergovernmental agreements were crucial to getting us going and understanding that we were providing value for the city of Atlanta.
And, you know, I think that's the critical question here from a lot of people is how is the city EDC going to be funded out of the gate and then for the long term? So Matthew or Veronica, will one of you jump in to speak to funding sources, where those are going to be coming from, if those are going to be fees that are generated like Tyrone is talking about in Invest Atlanta? Would you just touch on the various funding sources that the EDC might see?
Would you like to go, Veronica? Or would you like me to start? I'll start. Maybe you could correct me if I get anything wrong. As Tyrone said, when we're starting up here, there are some very specific both controls and projects and guardrails that the city wants to have around the organization. And as a part of that, what it does is it's providing a budgetary bridge for about 3 years from the EDD budget. And as exchange for that, there will be a contract with the city. We'd love to see it being more than annual. Currently, it is scheduled to be annual. And with that contract, the EDD and ACM and city manager will direct the entity as to what things it will work on. A couple of those things, though, are proposed to be districts and projects that would generate fees. And I really want to focus in. A lot of people have asked about the AEDC. What does it do that's different? I want to focus in on something Tyrone said. What it does that's different is it is a deal maker. It acts as a developer on the public side. And just to be very clear, when there's a private deal to be done, this entity doesn't do a private deal. This is specifically to fill the gap when it's hard for a private sector actor to do the deal, or there needs to be some setup of infrastructure or some setup of multi-year financing or something of that nature. And as those deals are done, as we say in the industry, it eats what it kills. So it really needs to show that it can accomplish things, or it will not be successful after that first bridge funding runs out. Veronica, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you hit it, Matt. Where the city's funding, initial funding, is seen as kind of some seedling funds to really get the EDC up and running. And I think that's kind of a theme in what we're saying, right? The city of Austin really is just kind of helping this infant EDC up and stand up and move forward and be self-sustaining. And that is the goal in the end.
So Matthew, you just hit on a whole slew of questions and kind of our next bucket, and that is really the interaction with the private sector. I think the audience here today is made up of a lot of private sector folks in the community. And I think it would be great if we could just provide a little more insight into how the EDC will be interacting with the private sector. And to add on to that, there were some questions that were submitted around the concern that the EDC might be a competitor to the private sector development, and could that impede the progressive development the city is currently seeing? So I guess let me start with Veronica and asking you, do you see the EDC and the private sector development as competitors, or do you see opportunities for them to work together in maybe P3 environments, or both?
I see this more as an opportunity. I don't see this as a competitor at all. This is really well, I'll start with Matt referred to the annual, and both Tyrone and Matt referred to the annual contract that the EDC will have with the city. And that's key because that will prioritize what the city wants to see as the projects for that year. And hopefully we do get to a multi-year agreement, but right now we're starting fledgling. But that will really speak to the reason why we're prioritizing those projects as a city, is because those are areas where we see it, we need to lean in as a public entity a little bit. And this truly is a public developer in a sense that it'll be working in spaces that is not an area where the private sector is really in competition with, but really help develop our community in those the spaces where we need the city or another governmental entity really wants to see a governmental lean or a public lean, if you will.
And I think, again, in our conversations prior to this presentation, there was the theme of the EDC is not a profit generating organization. Matthew, will you expand on that? Because I thought you said it really well when we were speaking in preparation.
Thank you. Hopefully I can recall it and do it in this kind of way. If I'm not. I think that the way to think about it is what we call the but-for. When there's ability for a private entity to do a transaction, the EDC does not get involved unless it is a project that wouldn't happen but for the EDC's involvement. That's sort of the barrier for whether or not the EDC gets involved. Well, when does that happen? There are a lot of projects that have upfront costs in terms of setting up infrastructure or taking a bet on a cultural entity that doesn't have a good history, or bringing in financing from a source that needs a public sector actor. And in all of those cases, the private sector doesn't necessarily have access to those things. So when there is a gap in the financing and you need a public sector plug, I think you could think of the EDC as getting involved under the direction of the city council and of EDD, and often with extra resources put in there from the public side, not only from the city, but also from the federal and potentially state level and other granting sources, tax credit sources. What it is the best partner you always wish you had on your private sector project, where it can come in with a speed that is usually much more quick than what you would see with a pure public sector partnership. I'll let Tyrone talk about that a little bit, but one of the main reasons for creating an entity like this is for the public side to deputize this entity with certain restrictions and certain streams of funding to go off and work with the private sector at a speed that we like to say is at the pace of the market. I will be honest and say it's somewhere in between the way you would like to move and the way the city normally moves. At least it's a little bit closer. I don't know, Tyrone, do you want to?
Yeah, no, I'd love to add on that. And I'd like to use an example. Here in Atlanta, we had a very smart Georgia Tech student that had a vision that if you could acquire 22 miles of unused rail transit around the city, you could create a linear park system that would spur economic development activity around this system, right? But what private developer is looking at acquiring 22 miles of unused rail to create the catalyst for this project, right? I would ask you to think of your EDC as a catalyst agent, right? So in the instance of Atlanta, the Atlanta Development Authority, which is a subsidiary of Invest Atlanta, created a tax increment finance district around this area, which provided the funding tool for a group of very smart people to implement the project. So at one time, there were 2 people in a lab downstairs at Invest Atlanta that now is a 55-member organization that breathes the Atlanta Beltline. And that project has created billions of dollars of economic development activity and is one of the largest infrastructure P3 deals in the Southeast. That would not have happened without the tax increment finance district and the EDC working together with the private sector to bring that project to fruition. So I would ask you to think about it that way. There are going to be instances where either through special powers or either through creative financing structures where this type of entity will be crucial to, particularly in hard deals, right? That you don't need them in easy deals. You need an organization like this in hard deals where you've had trouble being that catalyst.
So I want to go to a question that's popped up, and it's one that we've kind of seen, and I'd like to just suss out a little bit further. So understanding that the EDC is currently in its infancy, but thinking long-term about the more permanent structure, the question is, will the EDC board be an autonomous board with complete authority, or will the city council have to approve those deals? And Veronica, could you speak to that?
The goal is for the EDC to be autonomous with the direction to the city from city council. So I go back to that annual agreement. That really is what council is going to say is the priority for that annual commitment, and that will then ensue in the EDC's actions and transactions, if that makes sense.
Yeah. If I could say it back to you a different way, just to kind of clarify. So the base agreement between the EDC and the city, that will outline what the city's objectives are for the EDC. Once that's been outlined, then the EDC will have autonomy, or is intended to have autonomy, to then execute on those goals. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, fantastic.
Can I add one thing to that, Nina? There also is the ability for the EDC to go to council for particular projects that would make changes to that agreement. That's the case where there might be another approach to city council and it wouldn't be autonomous. In other words, the EDC could have direction from council to go pursue a project and approve projects that follow the following criteria and are inside the budget. If it happens that more money is needed, then the EDC would have to go back to council. It's not limited in doing that once a year, but the hope is that it would get enough direction to not need to do that. But in the case where you have a change in the market or a need for new financing, it's not that it has to wait to once a year to get those things to change. So I hope that's helpful and not confusing to say it that way.
No, and I'm glad you clarified that, because obviously that wouldn't be with the market pace that you were describing earlier. And is really, I believe, one of the intentions of the EDC is to be a more agile tool in the city's toolkit in order to act as a more standard market participant to get projects completed. And so to that, and this is another question that we're seeing come in. So why could the EDD, the current EDD, not be performing these same tools? Why is the EDC necessary? And I guess what I think this question is getting at, and some that were submitted before, is could you describe, and Matthew, if you'd take a stab at this, what the key differences are between the skills and outcomes that the EDD is currently responsible for and what the EDC is envisioned for?
Great, I'd be happy to take that. And it's a common question. I think the critical thing to say is that the EDD maintains incredible skills and will continue to do so. The EDD becomes the manager of an EDC, but what the EDC really is a development entity. That is not what the city is. And in fact, there's certain restrictions on cities being able to act as a developer. So the staffing of the EDC will literally be people that you would see in a development entity. They will be experts in transactions, in finance, and in planning and development. So they will serve to extend the reach and power of the EDD to be able to engage with more projects and do so more rapidly. And in addition, there is the ability to bring in funding streams that are not currently available to the EDD. and to have a focus that is not available to the EDD. The EDD and city staff are rightly constantly under whatever the current desires and current policy objectives of the council and the city manager's office. The EDC has the luxury of having this once a year, direction, and then running off with a mandate to be able to do things as long as it can keep in the lines that it's been given. We cannot underestimate how powerful that and the ability to bring in both public and private financing is. Just to get that focus is going to be an incredible amount of benefit. And further, over the years, it will build trust, not only inside the city, but with other governing entities, other governments that will live outside of politics a little bit more than you would see inside administrations. Let's be candid and say nothing lives outside of politics completely in these entities, but we do find that those relationships that are created help to make deals happen more readily, and the credibility that is given over time of this organization that's focused on this narrow band really helps to create this. I just want to, if I may, at the same time, just take up the question about strong mayor versus council system and say this actually is very helpful in terms of having an executive-like entity, an entity that acts as if you were in, as if you got clear direction from either a strong mayor or a city council, and it lives a little bit outside of that system. That's kind of the point. So you don't have to be an advocate for strong mayor to want this, or an advocate for council. What it actually just does is create a mandate that some would claim it's much easier to get in a strong mayor system, but it doesn't matter to this entity. It gets the mandate once a year. So at that point, it's divorced from whether or not it's strong mayor or district council.
If I could add on,
Yeah,
I could add on to that relationship between EDD and the EDC. I won't go into the strong mayor discussion, but I really do see to Matt's points, having this entity really focused on the transaction and the nimbleness of the market, that really, in effect, makes EDD's presence even more important, because we're just talking about the transaction. That multi-year relationship with that development will reside with EDD and continue to reside in EDD. And because we're really stepping up that transaction, I see that work expanding, honestly. So I think it's going to be a very crucial role between the two entities. And now I'm speaking to you as your EDD director and not your EDC CEO. But it is going to be an important relationship, and one that can really expound on what we are doing as a department in EDD, not only in redevelopment, but in the creative ecosystem as well. This entity will really take everything that we're doing at EDD and really help it grow.
So kind of one last question on this first section, which is really about the organization. We had a lot of questions come in related to what the governmental powers were that were bestowed to the EDC. So specifically, does the EDC have sovereign immunity or the ability to exercise eminent domain? And another kind of follow-up to that is the EDC bound by the same laws surrounding transparencies that a municipality is bound by? Veronica, would you take a stab at that? And then I'd be interested to hear from Tyrone in some of the examples in Atlanta.
So the goal of the EDC, so absolutely, the EDC does confine to the same laws that we have in our state regarding, in our country regarding transparency. We are setting it up to, if anyone's looking into what the EDC is doing, you'll see it's very similar to what our city council and our boards and commissions are doing. We're having publicly held meetings and so forth, meetings of the board and so forth. And sovereign powers do not, the city council has not given any of those sovereign powers to the EDC. So those powers do not exist. So at this point, or I should say this point, the goal of the EDC is to operate and continue to operate in this transparent manner.
Okay.
And I'd love to contribute to that. And they're different all over the country, right? One thing our council does is look at different examples and best practices from different entities. In Atlanta, first of all, we're a family of development authorities. So while we use the name Invest Atlanta, there are different bodies that have different powers, some of them governmental in nature. But in essence, we're a state chartered redevelopment authority. So under our Redevelopment Powers Act, which is our state law that governs redevelopment authorities, there are specified powers that exist. And I'll give you one example. Our tax increment finance districts, that they are set up in certain prescribed ways, right? And there are partners involved with that. So the city can create them, but to magnify the increment that's created, you tend to need to cooperate with your local county. And in Georgia, roughly 50 cents of every ad valorem property tax dollar is generated and goes to the public school district. So they're an important partner. So all of those partners have to work together just to allow that funding source to be maximized. Another example is we don't have eminent domain powers, and even if we did, I don't know if our political landscape is one in which we would necessarily take advantage of that. This is a tough city when you start talking about taking things from people. But there has to be the need to operate in a way that you have a competitive advantage vis-a-vis your city's economic development department. Under the Open Records Act, everybody's subject to open records. You'll get a request and we have a state law on how we respond to those. But to your point, there are specified powers that we do have in Atlanta that are helpful so that we have a competitive advantage over what the city could be doing. So that's just one example from Atlanta.
Thanks, Tyrone. So I'm going to pivot a little bit here, and I think this will answer our top question, but Austin, like many cities, is facing serious social challenges that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. Veronica, could you talk to us about the cultural trust, what it is, and how the EDC will act in supporting small businesses in the arts community who have been reeling during this crisis? And specifically, I think a lot of people want to know if the EDC will be able to act any more quickly than the city in delivering aid, maybe to our music venues or arts venues that are facing closure at this time.
I saw that question in the queue, and I like that question because it really speaks to what I was saying early on, is the purpose of the EDC is to focus on what we as a community value, and the arts and music of our community is definitely one of those top priorities, as we know, as well as our small business community. In regards to the cultural trust, I see it more as a long-term support. So the immediate aid that we've seen in the pandemic is crucial and important. And now, as your EDD director, we implemented 11 or so programs in the period of 8 to 9 months. So that's pretty unheard of in terms of a government responding to a situation and providing relief on the street. So kudos to the EDD team for their hard work there. I see the cultural trust at really looking at long-term solutions for how do we keep our vibrant art and music community in the places where they can perform their arts and their creative influences. So it could be in terms of maybe the cultural trust is purchasing properties and then leasing it back at an affordable rate. It's more of that long-term infrastructure that I see this EDC providing so that our creative sector can really thrive and continue to thrive in our community. That being said, again, it goes back to that annual agreement with City Council and what does City Council see as an immediate or the need for that year. So I think that will continue to develop as we go forward. And Matt spoke to the Cultural Trust advisory group that we are bringing on board, and we really seek their guidance and what does look like the best solution for our creative sector.
I'd like to say your cats are just endless entertainment here.
I'm so sorry. I need to learn to lock them up before I do something like this.
Don't be. I think probably every person on this call is experiencing something similar, well, whether it's their dog scratching outside the door or not, but I thought I'd just bring it to everyone's attention. Okay, so, I think I just want to ask this question somewhat pointedly. It sounds like from that response, the EDC is not yet formed fully enough to be the vehicle that's going to distribute aid or support the venues and arts community in the immediate term. Would that be fair to say?
I think that would be fair to say. I think we're working quickly. And if anybody's watched a council meeting, they've heard me say this at the podium when being asked. With every form of relief that we're looking at, we are going to, and I could say this across the board, not just in terms of relief to the pandemic, we're going to look at the most effective way to get dollars out the door. So I pointed to what the city of Austin has done in getting relief out, because we have moved fast. And the beauty of where we're going in 2021 is we have that infrastructure set up, and we're able to move even more nimble if more relief funds come down the pike. If more relief funds come down the pike and the EDC is in a position to release those quicker, then we will look to that. But we're going to try to administer any relief as efficiently as possible. That's our goal at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you. All right, so staying with some of these social issues, we have quite a few comments here around gentrification, affordability, affordable housing, homelessness. I'm going to read one question that's kind of come to the top here. So I've seen inclusionary zoning that provides for mixed income housing encourage affordability in infill, high opportunity neighborhoods in other cities. But my understanding is that it's not permitted in Texas by state law. Will AEDC be able to work around this somehow? So none of us, I don't believe, are lawyers on the phone, so we may not be as well versed in the Texas law, but generally, you know, I'd like to ask Veronica if you could just start in talking about how the EDC might be used as a vehicle for affordable housing or for providing workforce housing or mixed income housing in certain high demand and high density areas. And then Tyrone, I'd really love to hear from you how that may have been deployed in Invest Atlanta successly.
I will start by saying I learned something new about Matt every day now we've been working together for over a year. And the other day I learned that he teaches a class on inclusionary zonings at NYU. So I might want to sign up for that class and have my sister department in the housing and planning join us. This will not, and I saw the question about affordable housing. Affordable housing absolutely is a goal of our city. I would see it in terms for the EDC as part of a greater development. This EDC will not supplant our Austin Housing Finance Corporation. They still will continue to prioritize affordable housing developments. And we already do that as a city. When we look at parcels that we're redeveloping, we're having an active communication about, is this 100% affordable? Is this a housing development, or is this more of an economic development in terms of a mixed use and incorporating multiple city goals and priorities? And so that discussion will continue to happen, and we will continue to prioritize our affordable or housing developments within our Austin Housing Finance Corporation.
Yeah, I'd love to piggyback on that. Equity issues are not just important in your city, they're all over the country. What I'm finding is that very progressive cities are not doing this in one-off deals, right? They're creating equitable development plans for their cities. Atlanta just completed its first one last year called One Atlanta. And what it recognizes is that economic mobility, affordable housing, there are a bunch of issues that go into equity, right? So how are we going to, first of all, include the community in identifying what the metrics are to determine success, and then who's going to implement it, right? So I think your EDC is at a perfect position to do that. In Atlanta, the major architect of that plan was Invest Atlanta in consultation with the city and all of our partners. So the plan exists. On affordable housing, there are many ways in which an entity like this can be helpful, right? Inclusionary zoning is one particular alternative. However, that is something we have not had a lot of success in Atlanta in doing, with the exception of around our Beltline, which is rapidly gentrifying. But there are ways with financial tools that you can help. So within these family of development authorities I told you about in Atlanta, we actually have an urban residential finance authority, which is not our Atlanta housing authority, two separate entities. The one within Invest Atlanta really looks at city home dollars CDBG allocation and invest it on behalf of the city, primarily in the form of soft second mortgages to get projects that have a gap because you're trying to produce units at certain metrics of area median income, but there's always a gap in those projects. So those flexible funding tools can help private sector developers deliver affordable and mixed income housing at a faster rate, even using your state tax credit authority. So I wouldn't think of them as competing with each other, but as you get more and more financial tools that you're managing within your development authority, that there are ways in which you can partner with the private sector to produce outcomes that you wouldn't be able to produce otherwise.
And that seems to be a constant and important theme that people are asking about here. And Tyrone, you have been nominated to answer a couple of questions here by Matthew, and I think he's right to point these out to you. So there are two questions that kind of tie together. The first is, does the EDC's tax credit developments take potential opportunities away from existing private sector affordable housing developers? And then tacked on to that related question, would there be instances where the EDC would team as a co-developer with private sector developers? So I think if you could kind of tack those together, first off, I mean, you did somewhat answer this question about taking opportunities away and the competitive nature between public and private sector. Could you just answer that kind of on the nose about how you see those opportunities actually being co-developer or benefiting one another? So I'll
Yeah, no, I think first of all, the secret is in how these entities are managed, right? So if you're trying to maximize leverage, you are minimizing competition with the private sector. In fact, I would argue that you are enhancing P3 opportunities that will produce something that you couldn't otherwise. With respect to tax credit financing in the state of Georgia, typically our low-income housing tax credit is managed by the state, right? And there's allocation that's issued by the state in the form of also with the new market tax credit program, which is a federal program, that's typically managed by private community development entities. We did something very progressive back in 2006 or so. Our city, through the Development Authority, created our own new market tax credit program. So what we did was that we basically had up to now a $250 million private equity fund where we invested in private sector projects that wouldn't have happened otherwise in distressed communities that created community impacts that were additive to the community. So I wouldn't think of it as so competitive. And I know your private developers on the call are thinking, wow, do I have a new competitor that has a leg up because they have governmental powers? I would think of it the opposite way. Where can I find ways to partner and leverage these unique powers to create something that they couldn't create otherwise? And when you have financial tools at your disposal, that's where you have the most ability to leverage these outcomes. I would imagine that Veronica doesn't want to compete with any private sector developers on this call. She would love to be able to invest in some of these projects in a way where the private sector wouldn't invest to allow the catalyst to make them happen in the first place.
And I imagine that the South Central Waterfront District might be one of those prime opportunities. Matthew, do you want to touch on that?
Sure, I'd be glad to talk about that. I think that also perhaps answers the question from Wade and Jess. We have a couple of projects that council has directed us in resolution to look at. Those two are what Veronica mentioned earlier, which are long-term solutions for cultural affordability. And by cultural affordability there, we are talking both about music venues, cultural arts venues, and historic venues. We are working with EDD and City Council to try to figure out if we can help with a long-term real estate solution as Veronica described. And secondly, we really have been working on the South Central Waterfront. We've been tasked to work with the city's finance department and examine the work that has been done so far by the Schwab and by the Planning and Housing Department, and work in collaboration with the finance department to determine if we can move forward with some tool that addresses some of the gaps in the ability of private sector developers to move forward. We have had the opportunity to speak to some of the larger private sector developers in the district and just confirm that they really would like help. And they see that an entity like this might be able to help not take over any projects, but fund some of the infrastructure and bring in some of the financing that will be necessary in order for many of those projects to happen. In order to do that, we need to provide more resources to the city to be able to have the time, the budget and wherewithal to actually do all the diligence. I don't know how many of you have been involved in looking at the South Central Waterfront. That's pretty much been going on and off since 1985. There have been over 2,000 attendees at various public meetings, and we're still kind of at the line trying to figure out whether or not it can happen. The EDC really can function as a public developer and make a pitch to the city for the district as a whole, not for any one of the particular projects. And that allows us to address issues or attempt to address issues. I'm not an attorney, but we're attempting to address issues that have been brought up that have stopped moving forward with some of the issues that we have with the Land Development Code. We need to understand what is legal, what is permissible in the South Central Waterfront that also aligns with the goals that the council has and still provides opportunities for all the private property owners who, without a change, really just have the old warehousing district there. And I think everyone, public and private, would like to see something different than that. So that's really a great example of where this entity can come forward and pull together a lot of strings that need to be woven together into a tapestry that makes everyone relatively happy. And if you are a developer out there or work on transactions, you'll understand the idea of relative happiness and that there's a lot of different things that are going to need to be brought together in order to move forward, or we'll just stand there looking at a plan that everyone says they like, but no one knows how to implement.
So in the interest of time, we've got about 4 minutes left. I'm going to try and hit just a couple more questions before we wrap up. The first one, I'd like to take off of the question board here and pose to Veronica. And this is really just asking, look, you've got 22 members on your interim board. They are voices of various and sometimes competing interests. So how will you manage putting together a clear vision for the goals of each year, and who and how will those projects get picked that do float to the top of the list?
So to clarify, the permanent board will be 22 members. The interim board is only about 5 right now. That's a really good question. Certainly one that that we have given a lot of thought to. That board really is, when you look at that structure that we flashed up on the screen earlier, you are looking at a diverse level of interest, and that's where we're really going to have to work to prioritize those interests in that annual agreement. So you will, we are already talking when City Council is looking at where they want the EDC to focus. They're dealing with these competing interests on a daily basis as our elected officials, and so they're doing a great job in this first issuance and this first resolution for this EDC of saying, okay, our primary focus for the year is in the areas, the priorities that Matt laid out. So while it seems daunting, it's doable. And I think it's important for us to say, you know, while all these interests are important for this year, we are going to focus our efforts in this space. And we will work closely with this board to slim that list down and bring something that's doable to City Council for approval.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we can't solve all problems on one project in 1 year. So trying to prioritize and triage we're facing a lot of issues in our city, but we also are a fantastic city that is really poised for a fantastic comeback whenever things turn around. So there's a lot of hope there. And with that, I just want to thank all of our panelists for participating.